Why did the wounded commander sit upright the moment he saw her face? The room had been quiet just seconds before. Quiet in the way military rooms become when everyone inside them has already seen too much. Machines hummed softly. The curtain shifted with a thin draft from the northern window. The medic moved calmly between a metal tray and the cot. Her hands never shook. That was the first thing people noticed about Petty Officer Sarah Calloway if they were paying attention. Most people weren't. She was small, barely 5'4", light on her feet, quiet in rooms where louder personalities filled the air with jokes and stories. When she walked into the operations building at Fort Carson that morning, the hallway barely changed. Men glanced, then looked past her. Just a medic. Just support staff. Just someone who patched wounds after the real work was done. Sarah didn't mind. Being underestimated was a form of camouflage. And she had always been good at camouflage. Now she wrapped the blood pressure cuff around the injured commander's arm. Efficient, gentle, no wasted movement. The man lying on the cot had the kind of presence that still filled a room even while injured. Commander Douglas Trent had spent 4 decades in the harshest corners of military service. His body carried the history of it. Cracked ribs, a damaged shoulder, a knee that refused to straighten. He'd been hit by a car on a pre-dawn run 2 days earlier and had stubbornly refused evacuation. Operators were like that. Pain wasn't the enemy. Helplessness was. Sarah worked quietly, no small talk. She knew the type. They preferred silence while someone fixed them. She began pumping the cuff. Then his eyes opened. And everything changed. He looked straight at her. Not the quick glance people usually gave. Not the polite acknowledgement of a medic doing routine work. This was recognition. Immediate. Sharp. The way lightning cuts through dark sky. Before Sarah could react, he pushed himself upright with sudden urgency, ignoring the protest of broken ribs. Calloway. His voice filled the room like a dropped weight. The door outside stopped moving. Someone in the hallway paused. Sarah instinctively stepped back, but her training anchored her quickly. "I'm here to check your vitals, Commander," she said calmly. But Trent wasn't listening. He stared at her with the expression of someone seeing a ghost walk through a wall. "You're James Calloway's daughter." Not a question. A statement. The name landed in the room like a stone, dropped into deep water. For a moment, Sarah felt something she had trained herself not to feel. Instability. Her father's name hadn't been spoken like that in years. She swallowed it down. Professional. Calm. Steady. "Yes, sir," she said quietly. The commander leaned back slowly, breath heavy. Outside, voices resumed in the hallway. Inside, the silence grew heavier. "Finish the exam," Trent said after a moment. Sarah did. Because work came first. It always had. But inside her mind, something had begun moving, like a locked door opening somewhere she had avoided for years. And she had the unsettling feeling that the commander knew exactly what was behind that door. Why did the men start watching the quiet medic more closely after the second day? It started with something small. Something most people would have missed. During a training exercise in the foothills outside the base, one of the operators, Specialist Harlan Webb, collapsed halfway through a long movement drill. Experienced soldiers rarely stopped unless something was wrong. Really wrong. Webb tried to wave it off. Just need a minute. But Sarah was already kneeling beside him. 2 fingers on his neck. Eyes scanning his face. "His pulse is rapid," she said calmly. The team leader, Lieutenant Commander Garrett Voss, crouched beside her. "What do you see?" "Heat exhaustion progressing to stage 3, she answered without hesitation. Some of the men exchanged looks. She continued working. He stopped sweating. Skin is hot and dry. His gait changed 20 minutes ago. Voss looked at her. You noticed that? Yes, sir. How long? Since 900. No one had mentioned Webb struggling. But she had seen it. Catalogued it. Stored it. Like a quiet observer gathering pieces of a puzzle no one else realized existed. Within minutes she had Webb in the shade, cooling packs under his arms, electrolyte fluids ready. 30 minutes later he was stable. By afternoon he was back on the field. Nobody said much about it. But people started paying attention. Because competence speaks in ways that words cannot. Chief Petty Officer Marcus Briggs noticed something else that evening. He was in the equipment room when a young operator accidentally knocked his rifle from a shelf. The weapon slipped. Fell. Before it could hit the ground, Sarah's hand moved. She caught the rifle cleanly by the grip. Thumb already on the safety. Her eyes flicked to the chamber in one practiced motion. Then she froze. Almost as if she realized what she'd just done. She set the rifle down quietly and walked away. Briggs frowned. That movement hadn't been random. It had been trained. Very trained. Later that night, another man noticed something stranger. Chief Wade Cole sat in front of a computer pulling personnel records. Sarah Calloway's file was clean, almost too clean. Medical certifications. Support deployments. Excellent evaluations. But something was missing. Cole searched deeper. Public records. Competition archives. Then he found it. Colorado State Junior Marksmanship Championship. First place. 600 meters. Age 16. Sarah Calloway. Cole leaned back in his chair. Interesting. Because that achievement had been erased from every military document she'd ever submitted. Which meant one thing. She had hidden it. People hide things for two reasons. Shame or capability. Cole closed the file. Across the compound, Sarah was cleaning her medical kit in silence. Because she had spent 10 years pretending a part of her life no longer existed. And she had believed, until now, that she would never need it again. Why did the gunshot on the perimeter make her break a promise she had kept for 10 years? The radio crackled at 2:47 in the morning. Sarah was alone in the supply room counting gauze packs. The voice that came through the static was strained. Panicked. Man down Sector 4 live rounds. The transmission cut off. Sarah was already running. Her bag was over her shoulder before the words finished. Night air bit cold across the compound. Gravel crunched beneath her boots as she sprinted across the yard. She heard the breathing before she saw him. Vast. Shallow. Wrong. Danny Sherwood lay against a storage wall, both hands pressed against his thigh. Blood soaked the ground beneath him. Stay with me, Sarah said calmly. She knelt instantly. Tourniquet out. Placement precise. 4 inches above the wound. Sherwood cried out when she tightened it. She didn't apologize. Life-saving procedures rarely felt kind. Footsteps thundered behind her. Operators arrived. Rifles up. Scanning darkness. Then Briggs spoke quietly. Movement on the ridge. Everyone froze. Through binoculars, Cole spotted it. One man. Elevated. Long rifle. Watching the compound. A sniper. The situation changed instantly. Sherwood couldn't move. The road back to the operations building lay, fully exposed to the shooter's line of sight. QRF response time, 38 minutes. Too long. Commander Voss looked around. Their designated marksman had an injured arm. No clear shot. No suppression. And a wounded man bleeding on the ground. Then another voice entered the darkness. Commander Trent. He limped across the gravel carrying a rifle case. Inside was an M24 sniper rifle. He opened it slowly. But he didn't take the weapon. Instead, his eyes found Sarah. Calloway. Briggs stepped forward. Sir, she's a medic. Trent didn't look away. I know exactly who she is. The rifle case opened fully. The cold metal of the weapon caught the moonlight. Can you make the shot? Trent asked. The question hung in the air. Sarah looked at Sherwood. His breathing had stabilized. The tourniquet was holding. Then she looked at the ridge. 800 meters away. Wind shifting. Low light. 10 years since she'd touched a rifle. And a promise. Standing in a kitchen years earlier. Her mother's voice breaking after the funeral. No more rifles. Sarah had meant it. She had kept it. For a decade. But Sherwood's pulse beat weakly under her fingers. And the sniper watched the only road out. Some promises exist for peace. Others exist for survival. Tonight, only one of those could remain unbroken. Yes, sir, she said quietly. She took the rifle. And the past came rushing back. How did the quiet medic become the only person who could save them? Sarah dropped to the ground behind the rifle. Her body remembered the position before her mind finished thinking. Elbows planted. Bipod steady. Scope aligned. 820 meters. Wind 6 to 8 knots northwest. Cold barrel. The target crouched behind a ridge structure. Her breathing slowed. Behind her, nobody spoke. Even the wind seemed quieter. Her father's voice returned from somewhere deep in memory. Not pull. Squeeze. Like closing your hand around something fragile. She exhaled. The shot cracked through the night. Cole watched through binoculars. 2 seconds. Miss, he said. 9 inches right. The sniper shifted position. The window shrank. Someone behind her exhaled nervously. Sarah stayed perfectly still. She recalculated. Wind shift from the west. Adjustment. Small. Precise. Everything else disappeared. Not the night. Not the fear. Not the promise she had broken. Only the shot existed. Breath in. Hold. Space between heartbeats. Squeeze. The rifle cracked again. Cole's voice came 3 seconds later. Target down. Silence. Sarah lifted her head. Confirmed. Then she stood. No celebration. No reaction. She walked back to Sherwood and checked his pulse. Still good, she said. Sherwood blinked at her. That was you. She didn't answer. Because the work wasn't finished. And work always came first. What did the commander finally reveal about her father? Later that night, the adrenaline faded. Sarah sat alone at a metal table in the break room. Her hands lay flat on the surface. Still steady. The door opened slowly. Commander Trent entered. He sat across from her. Pain showed in every movement. But his voice was calm. I served with your father, he said. Sarah looked up. For 4 years. He paused. Kunar Province, 2009. Her chest tightened. The official report had always been simple. Killed in action. Ambush. End of story. But Trent shook his head slowly. That's not what happened. He told her the truth. Their unit had been trapped in a valley. Two enemy shooters controlled the only escape route. Crossing meant casualties, severe ones. Then James Calloway made a decision. He moved alone to the exposed ridge, held the enemy position, and kept them pinned down for 11 minutes, long enough for the rest of the team to escape. 12 men lived because of it. Trent's voice lowered. He knew exactly what it meant. Sarah stared at the table. 11 minutes. She had been 11 years old. Her father had been fighting for her future while she slept in a quiet house in Colorado. "I've carried something for 15 years, Trent said. He removed an envelope. Old. Sealed. Her name written in handwriting she knew instantly. Her father's. "He told me to give this to you when you were ready." Sarah held the letter carefully. She didn't open it yet. Some things required space before they could be understood. But something inside her had changed. The past she had buried had finally found its voice again. Why did the hardened SEAL chief hand her the one symbol he never gave away? Morning came quietly. The compound felt different. People watched Sarah now. Not with curiosity. With respect. Chief Briggs approached her outside the operations building. In his hand was a small metal pin. A Navy SEAL trident. He held it out. 19 years, he said. I've worked beside the best. He looked her directly in the eyes. But I've never seen someone do what you did last night. He paused. You weren't just a medic. She didn't interrupt. He placed the trident in her palm. You were exactly what the mission needed. Sarah closed her fingers around it. The metal felt heavier than it should have. Because it wasn't just recognition. It was trust. The kind earned only when someone understands what the work costs. That evening, she finally opened the letter her father had written. The words inside were simple. Steady. Just like his voice had always been. He wrote that courage wasn't loud. It didn't announce itself. It appeared quietly when someone chose to do what was necessary, even when it hurt. Sarah folded the letter carefully and placed it back in her pocket beside the trident. Outside, the mountains stood silent against the darkening sky. The world kept moving. Training would resume. Missions would continue. And somewhere, another wounded soldier would need steady hands. Sarah Calloway stood, picked up her medical kit, and walked back toward the work waiting for her. Because sometimes the strongest people aren't the ones carrying rifles. They're the ones who carry the weight of everything that comes after. And sometimes, dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Why did the commander keep watching the quiet medic long after everyone else stopped noticing her? It started the next morning. The base moved the way military bases always do after a night of disrupted sleep, slow at first, then suddenly loud. Boots on gravel, metal doors slamming, radios crackling awake. Sarah Calloway walked through it all like a shadow. Medical bag over her shoulder, hair tied back, calm face that revealed almost nothing. Most of the operators barely glanced at her. They were used to medics rotating through the compound, capable people, but background figures in a world focused on missions and movement. Sarah preferred it that way. She had spent years learning how to disappear in plain sight. Inside the operations building, Commander Douglas Trent leaned against the briefing table with his arms crossed. The accident 2 days earlier had left him stiff and slow, but his eyes were as sharp as ever. And they followed Sarah the moment she stepped inside. She didn't look at him. Instead, she walked to the medical locker and began restocking supplies with quiet precision. Alcohol wipes, saline bags, compression wraps. Each item placed exactly where it belonged. The room filled with the low murmur of operators discussing the day's training schedule. Lieutenant Commander Garrett Voss tapped a marker against the map board. Two teams rotating through ridge navigation drills, he said. Weather stable, visibility decent. Keep comms open. Someone in the back muttered, as long as Webb doesn't collapse again. A few chuckles followed. Sarah didn't react. But Trent noticed something. When the joke landed, her shoulders stiffened for half a second. Then they relaxed again. Tiny movement. Most people would never have seen it. But Trent had spent decades studying people under pressure. It was how men stayed alive in places where mistakes were paid for in blood. He walked slowly toward her. Petty Officer Calloway. She turned immediately. Yes, sir. Her posture was perfect, but he saw the faint tension in her eyes. You deployed overseas before? He asked casually. Yes, sir. Where? Support rotations, Germany, Kuwait. Simple answers. Clean. Almost too clean. Trent studied her for another moment before nodding once. Carry on. She returned to her work. But something in the room had shifted. Across the table, Chief Petty Officer Marcus Briggs leaned closer to Wade Cole. Why's the old man so interested in the medic? Briggs murmured. Cole shrugged. Maybe he likes efficient people. Briggs watched Sarah for a few seconds. Something about her movements felt familiar. Not medical training. Something else. Something buried under the surface. But the day's work began pulling attention away. Soon the teams were moving out toward the foothills for navigation drills. And Sarah followed with the medical unit vehicle rolling slowly behind them. The mountains north of the base rose like silent walls. Wind moved through dry grass. The sky stretched wide and empty above the training ground. It should have been a routine day. But routine has a way of breaking when people carry secrets they've hidden too long. Why did she notice the problem long before anyone else did? The first hour of the drill went smoothly. Operators moved through the terrain in staggered formations, navigating checkpoints marked across the rocky slopes. Sarah walked several hundred meters behind the main group. Her eyes moved constantly. Watching. Listening. Most medics focused on injuries. Sarah watched behavior. Breathing patterns. Body language. Subtle shifts in movement. Because injuries rarely arrived without warning. They whispered first. Then they shouted. And if you missed the whisper, you paid the price. Specialist Harlan Webb had been moving strong at the beginning of the climb. Big guy. Strong legs. Reliable operator. But 30 minutes in, Sarah noticed the first change. His shoulders started rising higher with each breath. His pace slowed by half a step. Small things. But small things become big ones quickly under the sun. She checked her watch. 0900. She kept observing. At 0912, Webb wiped sweat from his forehead for the 5th time in less than 3 minutes. At 0918, he stopped drinking from his hydration tube. At 0922, his gait shifted. His right foot began dragging slightly. Sarah frowned. That was the moment she knew. Heat exhaustion was building. And men trained to ignore discomfort often ignored it too long. She started moving closer. At 0929, Webb stumbled. Just slightly. The others kept moving. Training demanded it. Nobody wanted to be the weak link. Then at 0934, Webb dropped to one knee. Just need a minute, he said. The team leader turned. Webb. But Sarah was already there. She knelt beside him, fingers pressing against his neck. Pulse fast. Too fast. His pulse is rapid, she said calmly. Lieutenant Commander Voss crouched beside her. What do you see? Heat exhaustion progressing toward stage 3. A few men exchanged glances. Stage 3 meant danger. Serious danger. How long? Voss asked. Since 900, Sarah replied quietly. Voss blinked. You noticed that? Yes, sir. The surprise on his face was impossible to hide. Most people would have missed it. But Sarah had been watching. Always watching. She moved quickly now. Cooling packs under Webb's arms. Helmet off. Electrolyte fluids ready. Webb groaned as she tilted his head slightly. You're good, she said softly, just overheated. Within minutes his breathing slowed. The color returned to his face. Relief passed through the team like a quiet wave. By afternoon, Webb was walking again. Stronger. Alive. No one said much. But men who worked dangerous jobs understood something important. Competence saves lives. And Sarah Calloway had just proven she had plenty of it. Why did the chief suddenly start questioning everything about her? That evening, the compound quieted down again. Training days had a way of draining energy out of even the toughest operators. Most of the team gathered in the equipment room to clean rifles and reset gear. Sarah entered quietly to grab a medical kit. She barely noticed the men scattered around the room. But Chief Briggs noticed her. He always noticed everything. Years of experience had turned observation into instinct. He watched as she walked past a storage rack. Then something unexpected happened. One of the younger operators accidentally bumped the shelf. A rifle slid free. Metal scraped. Gravity took over. The weapon began falling toward the concrete floor. It would have hit hard. Hard enough to damage the optics. But before it reached the ground, Sarah moved. Her hand shot out. She caught the rifle cleanly by the grip, thumb already resting against the safety. The motion was fluid, automatic, perfect. Her eyes flicked briefly toward the chamber like someone confirming weapon status. Then she froze, almost like someone realizing they had just revealed too much. She placed the rifle back on the rack gently. Careful, she said quietly to the young operator. Then she walked out of the room. The silence behind her stretched several seconds. Briggs slowly leaned back against the wall. Well, he muttered. That was interesting. Cole looked up from the table. What? Briggs nodded toward the door. That medic. Cole shrugged. What about her? Briggs scratched his beard slowly. You ever see someone handle a rifle like that, who supposedly never trained with one? Cole frowned. Medical Corps doesn't run weapon drills like that. Exactly, Briggs said. They both sat quietly for a moment. Something about Sarah Calloway no longer fit the simple picture they had assumed. Later that night, curiosity got the better of Cole. He logged into the personnel system and pulled up her file. The document looked ordinary, almost boring. Medical certifications, support rotations, clean evaluations. No combat roles, no marksmanship specialization. But the more he looked, the stranger it felt. There were gaps, not missing time, missing details, almost like someone had carefully trimmed pieces out. Cole opened another database. Civilian records, old competition archives. It took 15 minutes before he found it. His eyebrows lifted slowly. Colorado State Junior Marksmanship Championship. First place. 600 meters. Age 16. Name Sarah Calloway. Cole leaned back in his chair. That, he whispered to himself, is definitely not in her military record. Which meant only one thing. She had erased it. Deliberately. People erase skills for a reason. Either they want to forget who they were, or they never want anyone asking them to become that person again. Cole closed the file. Outside, wind moved quietly across the compound. Inside her small quarters, Sarah sat on the edge of her bunk cleaning her medical kit. Her hands moved slowly now, carefully, because every once in a while, when the room grew quiet enough, she could still hear the echo of a rifle shot from a life she had promised herself was over. But promises made in peace have a strange habit of breaking when the world suddenly needs the person you used to be. Why did the gunshot in the middle of the night make her break a promise she had kept for 10 long years? The compound was almost completely silent when it happened. Most of the operators were asleep. A few lights glowed dimly inside the operations building. Wind pushed gently across the open ground, rattling a loose metal panel somewhere near the storage sheds. Sarah Calloway sat alone in the medical supply room. Inventory always took longer at night, fewer interruptions, fewer people asking questions. She moved slowly between shelves, counting gauze packs, saline bags, syringes. Everything had a place. Everything needed to be ready. Because emergencies never arrived politely. They arrived loud and sudden. The radio cracked to life at 2:47 a.m. Static burst through the quiet room. Then a voice. Sharp, strained. Man down Sector 4, live rounds. The transmission cut out. Sarah didn't wait for the rest. Her body reacted before thought finished forming. Medical bag over shoulder. Door open. Boots already moving. The cold night air hit her face as she ran across the gravel yard. Her mind moved through possibilities automatically, training stepping in where emotion would only slow things down. Man down. Live rounds. Two separate problems. But the wounded one came first. Always. She reached the perimeter storage area in less than 30 seconds. That's when she heard the breathing. Vast. Panicked. Wrong. Private Danny Sherwood lay against the side of a metal storage unit, both hands gripping his thigh. Blood spread dark across the ground beneath him. Hey, Sarah said softly as she dropped beside him. Sherwood's eyes darted toward her. I didn't see him. Focus on me, she said calmly. Her hands were already working. Tourniquet out. Strap looped. Placement exact. 4 inches above the wound. She twisted the rod tight. Sherwood cried out sharply. The pain was brutal, but the bleeding slowed, then stopped. Sarah checked his pulse. Still fast, but strong enough. You're okay, she said quietly. You're staying with me. Sherwood swallowed hard. Someone's out there. Footsteps thundered toward them. 3 operators arrived, rifles raised toward the dark ridge overlooking the compound. Chief Briggs dropped beside Sarah. How bad? Through and through, she said. Leg, no artery. Sherwood exhaled shakily. Then Cole's voice cut through the night. Movement. Everyone froze. He raised binoculars slowly toward the ridge. A figure shifted against the dark outline of rock and scrub brush. High ground. Long sightline. Perfect overwatch position. Cole lowered the binoculars slowly. Sniper. The word carried a cold weight. Because snipers didn't fire warning shots. They waited. They studied. They picked moments. And right now, the only path back to the medical building ran directly through his line of sight. Sherwood couldn't move. Not with the tourniquet. Not without risking collapse. How long until QRF? Briggs asked quietly. Cole checked his watch. 38 minutes. Too long. A sniper could fire 10 shots in 38 minutes. Maybe more. And all he needed was one. Sherwood groaned as another wave of pain hit. Sarah adjusted the bandage pressure carefully. "Stay with me," she murmured. Behind them, another set of footsteps approached slowly. Commander Trent. He walked with a slight limp from the accident, but his presence still carried the quiet authority of a man used to dangerous decisions. In his hand was a long black rifle case. No one spoke as he knelt down and placed it on the gravel. The latches clicked open. Inside rested an M24 sniper rifle. Clean, precise, deadly in the right hands. Briggs looked at him. "Our marksman's arm is still busted," he said quietly. Trent nodded. He already knew. Everyone here did. The compound suddenly felt very small. Very exposed. Sherwood groaned again, his breathing growing weaker. Time was running out. Trent closed the rifle case halfway. But he didn't reach for the weapon. Instead, his eyes turned toward Sarah. "Calloway." Her hands paused on Sherwood's bandage. "Yes, sir." Briggs frowned. "Sir, she's—" "A medic," Trent finished calmly. Then he said something that made the air feel heavier. "I know exactly who she is." He opened the case again. Moonlight glinted across the rifle's barrel. The weapon lay between them, like a question nobody wanted to ask. Sarah looked at it. For a long moment she didn't move. Because rifles meant something very different to her than they did to the men around her. To them it was a tool, a skill, a job. To her, it was a memory, a promise. 10 years earlier. A quiet kitchen. Her mother sitting at the table with red eyes and trembling hands. The news had arrived that afternoon. Killed in action. Ambush. No details. Just a folded flag and a room full of silence. Sarah had been 16. Old enough to understand what the rifle had taken from her life. And that night, through tears and grief, she had made a promise. No more rifles. Her mother had nodded slowly. Neither of them realizing how heavy those words would become. Now the weapon lay in front of her. Cold. Familiar. Dangerous. Behind her, Cole whispered again. "He's still up there." The sniper shifted slightly on the ridge. Watching. Waiting. Sherwood's pulse beat weakly beneath Sarah's fingers. If they tried to move him now, the sniper would have an easy shot. If they waited 38 minutes, Sherwood might bleed out anyway. Two impossible choices. Unless someone made a third. Trent spoke quietly. 800 meters, he said. Wind pushed across the compound from the northwest. The same wind Sarah had felt on her face the moment she ran outside. Her mind began calculating automatically. Distance. Angle. Elevation. The math appeared before she could stop it. Muscle memory. Buried. But not gone. "Can you make the shot?" Trent asked. The question settled into the night like falling snow. No one else spoke. Because suddenly the pieces were falling into place for everyone. Briggs looked at Sarah slowly. Then at the rifle. Then back at her. Realization flickered across his face. "You're kidding me," he murmured under his breath. Sarah looked down at Sherwood. His eyes were half closed now. Breathing shallow. Fatting. She tightened the bandage once more. Then she looked toward the dark ridge. 800 meters. Wind shifting. Low light. 10 years since she had last touched a rifle. 10 years since she had promised herself she wouldn't. But promises made in grief rarely account for moments like this. Moments when someone else's life balanced quietly in your hands. Sherwood coughed weakly. "Don't let me die out here," he whispered. Something inside Sarah shifted. Not anger, not fear. Something steadier. Responsibility. She stood slowly. Her knees brushed the gravel as she stepped toward the rifle case. Briggs watched her with wide eyes. "You actually know how to run that thing?" he asked. Sarah didn't answer. Instead, she lifted the M24 carefully from the foam padding. The weight felt familiar, like shaking hands with an old ghost. She checked the bolt, the scope, the chamber. All automatic, all precise. The men around her fell silent, because suddenly the quiet medic didn't look like background support anymore. She looked like something else entirely. Something focused, something dangerous. Trent nodded once, the smallest sign of trust. Sarah dropped to the ground and positioned the rifle against the gravel. Her elbows found the earth naturally. Her breathing slowed. The scope lifted to her eye. And somewhere deep inside her mind, her father's voice returned. Soft, steady, just like it used to sound on the long afternoons when he taught her how to shoot. Not pull, he had always said. Squeeze. She adjusted the scope. 800 meters. The sniper moved again on the ridge. Sherwood's pulse beat faintly beneath the tourniquet behind her. The past and the present had finally collided. And Sarah Calloway realized something in that moment. Some promises are meant to protect you from pain, but others must break so someone else can live. Why did the entire compound fall silent the moment she settled behind the rifle? The gravel was cold beneath Sarah Calloway's elbows. Small stones pressed into the fabric of her sleeves as she lowered herself into position. The M24 rested against the ground, bipod steady, barrel aimed toward the dark ridge rising beyond the compound. For a moment, everything else disappeared. The voices, the wounded man breathing behind her, even the cold wind sliding across the open field. Only the rifle remained, and the distance between her and the man watching them from the ridge. 820 meters. She adjusted the scope slightly, bringing the silhouette into sharper focus. The figure crouched behind a jagged rock outcrop, barely visible except for the faint shift of movement against the darker background. The sniper was patient. That much was obvious. Patient shooters were the most dangerous. They waited for mistakes. Behind Sarah, no one spoke. Even Chief Briggs had gone completely still, his eyes fixed on her in quiet disbelief. Because the medic kneeling on the gravel no longer looked like the quiet support staff they had all overlooked for days. Her posture had changed. Her breathing had slowed. Her entire body had become calm in a way only people with very specific training understood. Cole leaned beside Briggs and whispered, barely audible. Where the hell did she learn this? Briggs didn't answer, because the truth was beginning to settle in. She hadn't learned it recently. She had carried it with her the whole time. And hidden it. Sarah exhaled slowly. The scope floated gently over the distant ridge. Wind pushed from the northwest, light but steady. The dry grass between the compound and the hillside bent slightly with each gust. She watched it carefully. Wind was a conversation between distance and patience. Ignore it and the bullet would wander. Respect it and the shot would find its way. Behind her, Sherwood groaned faintly. The sound cut through her focus like a small crack in glass. His breathing was weaker now. Tourniquet holding. But time wasn't on their side. Sarah adjusted the scope again. The crosshair settled just left of the sniper's shoulder. The man shifted slightly. His rifle moved, searching, waiting for someone to try crossing the open ground. Her father's voice surfaced quietly inside her mind. Not loud, never loud. He had always spoken calmly when teaching her, as if patience was the most important lesson. Distance lies to your eyes, he used to say. Trust the math. She inhaled slowly, then held the breath halfway, just like he taught her. Behind her, Commander Trent crouched beside Briggs. "How's her sight picture?" he whispered. Briggs shook his head slightly. "No idea." Cole still watched through binoculars. "She's got maybe a 5-second window," he murmured. The sniper moved again, adjusting his own position. If he spotted them first, everything would collapse quickly. Sarah steadied the rifle. Her finger rested against the trigger. Not pulling, just waiting. She squeezed. The rifle cracked. The sound split the quiet compound like lightning. Recoil pressed into her shoulder. Dust lifted from the gravel beneath the barrel. Cole tracked the ridge through his binoculars. 2 seconds passed. Then 3. "Miss," he said quietly. "Right side." The word hung in the air like a cold wind. Behind them, Sherwood coughed weakly. Briggs swore under his breath. But Sarah didn't move. Not even a little. She kept the rifle steady. The sniper shifted again. Alert now. Searching for the source of the shot. Cole adjusted the binoculars. "He's moving left," he whispered. "Less cover now." Sarah's mind recalculated. Wind speed. Distance. The small adjustment needed. Her father's voice returned again. Gentle. Patient. The first shot tells you the truth. She nudged the scope slightly left. Not much. Just enough. The world narrowed again. Everything outside the crosshair faded away. No compound. No wounded soldier. No watching operators. Just the ridge. Just the target. Just the space between heartbeats. Her breathing slowed further. In. Out. Pause. Her finger tightened gently. Not pulling. Squeezing. The rifle fired again. Another sharp crack split the night. The recoil settled quickly. Cole's voice came 3 seconds later. Quiet. Certain. Target down. For a moment, nobody moved. The wind returned. The dry grass shifted again. Cole kept the binoculars raised. Watching. Waiting. Then he lowered them slowly. No movement. The silence that followed felt heavy. Almost unreal. Because moments earlier they had all been trapped. Exposed. Powerless. Now the ridge was empty. The threat gone. Briggs exhaled a long breath. "Well," he muttered softly, "I guess the medic knows how to shoot." But Sarah had already lifted her head away from the scope. She didn't celebrate. Didn't smile. Didn't even look toward the ridge. Instead, she turned immediately and moved back to Sherwood. Her hands returned to the tourniquet. Checking. Tightening. Monitoring his pulse again. Professional. Focused. Like the shot had been nothing more than a brief interruption in her real job. Sherwood blinked up at her, pale but conscious. "That was you?" he asked weakly. Sarah adjusted the bandage carefully. "You're stable," she said quietly. The question hung there unanswered. But Sherwood didn't push. Because something about her expression said this moment wasn't about recognition. It was about survival. Commander Trent watched her silently from a few feet away. The old soldier's eyes carried something deeper than surprise now. Understanding. Because the way she had moved. the way she had controlled the rifle. That kind of composure didn't come from competition trophies or casual training. It came from something else, something harder, something earned in places where mistakes cost lives. He stood slowly, wincing slightly as his ribs reminded him they were still broken. "Get Sherwood inside," he ordered. Briggs and Cole carefully lifted the wounded man onto a stretcher. As they carried him across the compound, operators began emerging from nearby buildings, drawn by the rifle shots. Questions filled the air. What happened? Who fired? Is the perimeter clear? Cole answered simply. Sniper threat neutralized. One of the younger operators glanced toward Sarah as she packed the rifle back into its case. "Which one of you guys took the shot?" he asked. Briggs chuckled quietly. "You're not gonna believe it." But Sarah had already picked up her medical bag. The rifle case closed with a soft click as Trent locked it. She walked toward the operations building behind the stretcher team. Quiet again. Almost invisible. Just like before. Except now, everyone watching understood something they hadn't seen earlier. Strength doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it stands quietly in the background, waiting for the moment when someone else's life depends on it. And when that moment arrives, it acts. Without hesitation. Without pride. Without asking to be seen. Why did the commander wait until the compound was quiet before telling her the truth about her father? The adrenaline faded slowly. By dawn, the compound had returned to its usual rhythm, boots crossing gravel, radios buzzing with routine updates, operators moving through the yard with coffee cups in their hands. But something had changed. People watched Sarah Calloway differently now. Not openly. Not rudely. Just longer. The quiet medic who had arrived days earlier with a medical bag and soft voice now carried an unspoken weight in the room. Because men who lived by precision understood what they had witnessed the night before. 800 meters. Cold rifle. Low light. One correction shot. One confirmed hit. That kind of control didn't come from luck. It came from a life someone had worked very hard to leave behind. Sarah felt the attention even when no one spoke about it. Which was why she spent most of the morning inside the medical room, checking Sherwood's condition and keeping herself busy. Sherwood lay in the cot near the window, leg elevated, color slowly returning to his face. "You saved my life," he said quietly while she changed the bandage. She didn't look up. "You did most of the work," she replied. "You stayed conscious." He chuckled weakly. "That wasn't what I meant." Sarah tightened the dressing slightly. The wound looked clean, stable. "You'll walk again in a few weeks," she said. Sherwood studied her face. "You ever going to talk about last night?" She shook her head gently. "No." He nodded slowly. "Fair enough." Some stories carried too much weight to tell casually. Outside the medical room, Chief Briggs leaned against the hallway wall beside Cole. Both men were watching through the glass window as Sarah finished the bandage change. "She's pretending none of it happened," Cole murmured. Briggs crossed his arms. "People who can shoot like that usually have a reason for keeping quiet." Cole nodded toward the window. "You think the commander knew?" Briggs glanced down the hallway. "Pretty sure." Because Commander Trent had been watching Sarah from the beginning. And now he was walking toward the medical room again. Slow steps. Careful breathing. Broken ribs still reminding him he wasn't young anymore. He paused at the door, then knocked softly before entering. Sarah looked up immediately. "Yes, sir." Trent closed the door behind him. Sherwood glanced between them, sensing something serious. Give us a minute, Trent said. Sherwood nodded and slowly turned his head toward the window. The room fell quiet. Trent pulled a chair across from Sarah and sat down slowly. For a moment he said nothing, just studied her. Not like a commander inspecting a subordinate. More like someone trying to confirm something they had suspected for years. You shoot like your father, he said finally. The words landed softly, but Sarah felt them immediately. She lowered her gaze to the floor. My father taught me when I was young. Trent nodded once. Yes, he did. Silence stretched again. The kind of silence that usually arrives right before someone tells the truth they've been holding too long. Sarah broke it first. You served with him, she said quietly. It wasn't really a question. Trent leaned back slightly. For 4 years. Her chest tightened. She had heard that phrase before. At the funeral. From officers offering polite condolences. But none of them had looked at her the way Trent did now. Like someone who had actually been there. Kunar Province, he continued. 2009. Sarah felt her hands slowly curl together. She knew the official report by heart. Ambush. Killed in action. End of story. But Trent shook his head slowly. That report was simplified. The words sounded careful. Measured. What actually happened? Sarah asked. Trent looked toward the window for a moment before answering. Because some memories didn't age easily. Our unit was trapped in a valley, he said. 2 enemy shooters had the ridge line above us. He pointed slightly upward with one finger. Same advantage your sniper had last night. Sarah listened without moving. Every time we tried to move, Trent continued, they fired. He paused. 3 men went down in the first 2 minutes. Her stomach tightened. She could picture it. A narrow valley. Rifle fire echoing off rock walls. Nowhere to run. Extraction was impossible, Trent said. No air support, no alternate route. Sarah's voice was barely audible. So what happened? Trent leaned forward slowly. Your father stood up. She blinked. He what? He stood up, Trent repeated quietly. He realized the shooters were focusing on movement. Sarah's heart began to pound. He moved toward the ridge, Trent said. Alone. Her breath caught in her chest. Why would he do that? Trent's eyes met hers. Because someone had to draw their attention. The room felt smaller suddenly. He pinned them down, Trent continued. 11 minutes. Sarah stared at him. 11 minutes. Trent nodded slowly. Long enough for the rest of us to move through the valley and reach cover. Her voice trembled slightly. And him. Trent's gaze dropped to the floor. He knew exactly what he was doing. The silence that followed felt heavy. 15 years of unanswered questions suddenly settling into place. My father, she whispered, held them off alone. Trent nodded. 12 men walked out of that valley alive because of him. Sarah felt her throat tighten. For years she had imagined that moment as something chaotic. Random. A bad stroke of luck. But now she saw it clearly. A choice. A deliberate one. Her father standing on a ridge somewhere far away, while she slept safely at home. Fighting for minutes that would become the rest of her life. Trent reached slowly into the pocket of his jacket. There's something else, he said. He placed a small envelope on the table. Old. Edges slightly worn. Her name written across the front in familiar handwriting. Her father's handwriting. Sarah stared at it. Her chest tightened again. He gave it to me before that mission, Trent said quietly. Told me to deliver it to you someday. She looked up. Why didn't you before now? Trent's expression softened. He said to wait until you were ready. Sarah swallowed slowly. And you think I'm ready now? Trent nodded toward the window, where the mountains stretched across the horizon. You made an 800-meter shot last night to save someone's life, he said. I think he'd say you were ready. Sarah picked up the envelope carefully. The paper felt fragile in her hands, like something that had waited patiently through years of silence. She didn't open it yet. Some moments deserved space before they were broken open. Trent stood slowly. Your father believed something very simple, he said as he moved toward the door. Sarah looked up. What was that? He paused before answering. That courage isn't loud. He rested his hand briefly on the door handle. It just shows up when people need it. Then he left the room. Sarah sat quietly with the envelope resting in her hands. Outside, the compound continued its normal routine. But inside her chest, something long buried had finally begun to breathe again. Why did the toughest man in the compound walk across the yard that evening with something in his hand he had never given away before? The day moved slowly after the conversation with Commander Trent. Sarah didn't open the letter. Not yet. Some truths arrive like storms. Others need quiet before they can be understood. She slipped the envelope carefully into the inside pocket of her jacket and returned to her routine. Routine was safe. Routine gave the mind somewhere to rest. Sherwood slept through most of the afternoon after another round of antibiotics. His pulse was strong now, breathing steady, the color returning to his face. When Sarah stepped outside the medical building near sunset, the mountains around the compound were turning gold under the fading light. Training drills had resumed. Men ran the obstacle course. 2 operators practiced close-quarters movement near the motor pool. Normal life had returned, but it didn't feel quite the same. Because now when people saw Sarah walking across the yard with her medical bag, they didn't look past her. They nodded. Small gestures. Respectful ones. Recognition rarely needed words among people who worked in dangerous professions. She crossed toward the equipment shed, planning to restock a trauma kit. Halfway there, someone called her name. Calloway. The voice belonged to Chief Petty Officer Marcus Briggs. He stood near the edge of the yard, arms crossed, his broad shoulders blocking the wind as it rolled down from the hills. Sarah walked over. Yes, Chief. Briggs studied her quietly for a moment. Up close, the lines on his face showed years of long deployments and harder decisions. Men like Briggs rarely wasted words. He held something in his hand. A small metal object. At first Sarah didn't recognize it. Then the fading sunlight caught the shape. A trident. The Navy SEAL insignia. She blinked once, surprised. Briggs turned the metal pin slowly between his fingers. 19 years, he said. Sarah stayed silent. 19 years working beside operators, he continued. Different teams, different countries, different missions. The wind lifted the edge of his sleeve. I've seen some impressive things in that time. He looked directly at her now. But I've never seen someone do what you did last night. Sarah shifted her weight slightly. It was just a shot, Chief. Briggs shook his head. No. His voice stayed calm. It was. He stepped closer and held the trident out. I've carried this extra one for years. Sarah frowned slightly. Why? Briggs shrugged. Never really knew. The metal glinted faintly in the sunlight. Maybe I was waiting to meet someone who understood what it stands for. Sarah hesitated. Chief, I'm not. A SEAL, he finished. She nodded. Briggs smiled faintly. I know. He placed the trident gently in her palm anyway. The metal felt heavier than it looked, because symbols always carried more weight than the metal they were made from. This doesn't mean you're one of us, Briggs said quietly. It means we saw what you did. Sarah looked down at the insignia resting in her hand, then back at him. You don't owe me that. Briggs shook his head slowly. Respect isn't something you owe people. He stepped back. It's something you recognize when it shows up. The wind moved through the compound again. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Briggs nodded once and turned away, heading toward the barracks, leaving Sarah alone with the small piece of metal resting in her hand. She stood there for a long time, because the weight of recognition can feel almost as heavy as responsibility. Eventually, she slipped the trident into the same pocket that held her father's letter. Two objects, two pieces of a life she had tried very hard not to carry anymore. But some things follow you quietly, no matter how far you walk. That night the compound grew still again. Most of the lights went dark one by one. Wind brushed softly against the metal siding of the buildings. Sarah sat alone at the small desk in her quarters. The envelope rested in front of her. Her father's handwriting stared back at her. She ran her thumb slowly across the edge of the paper. For 15 years, this letter had existed somewhere in the world. Waiting, patient, like a voice that refused to disappear. Finally, she opened it. The paper inside unfolded carefully. Her father's writing looked exactly the way she remembered. Strong, steady, confident. She began reading. The letter wasn't long. Her father had never been a man of long speeches. But every line carried the quiet honesty she remembered from childhood. He wrote about small things first. About the day she had first hit a target at 300 yards. About the way she used to laugh when the recoil surprised her. About how proud he was of her patience. Then the tone shifted. He wrote about service. Not in heroic language. Not in the loud words people often used when talking about soldiers. Instead, he described responsibility. The kind that arrives when someone realizes their actions can protect other people. He told her something simple. That courage wasn't about strength. It wasn't about fearlessness. It was about choosing to act when someone else needed you, even when the cost felt heavy. Especially then. At the bottom of the page, he had written one final line. If you ever face a moment where someone needs you to be brave, trust yourself. Sarah sat back slowly in the chair. The room was quiet except for the wind outside. Her eyes drifted toward the pocket where the trident rested beside the folded letter. Two symbols. Two reminders. One from the past. One from the present. Both telling the same quiet story. Outside the window, the mountain stood dark against the night sky. The world beyond the compound kept moving. Somewhere out there another mission would begin soon. Another team would face danger. Another wounded soldier would need steady hands. Sarah folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. Then she stood. She picked up her medical kit from the floor and slung it over her shoulder. Because tomorrow the routine would begin again. Rounds to check. Bandages to change. Lives to steady. She paused at the door before stepping out into the cool night air. Not as the girl who had buried her father's memory under years of silence. And not as the sniper everyone suddenly believed her to be. Just Sarah Calloway. A medic. Someone who showed up when people needed help. Sometimes the strongest people in the room aren't the ones carrying rifles. They're the ones carrying responsibility. The ones who stay steady when others are hurting. the ones who choose action over recognition. Because sometimes courage doesn't shout. It doesn't demand applause. It simply appears in quiet moments, when someone decides another life matters more than their own comfort. And sometimes, dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.